A number of years ago, I was volunteering for the food bank, and I signed up to deliver food boxes to senior citizens who couldn't get out to the grocery store. Maybe they were getting Meals on Wheels, but they needed some extra commodities in their home. And I was assigned to deliver to a dozen or so different senior citizens. I remember one in particular that I would visit once a month and bring her box of food for commodities from the food bank. Her name was Ellen. She was in her late 70s. She lived on a fixed income, and I remember going to Ellen's house. It was July. She lived in a mobile home or a trailer, and if you've ever pictured a really beat-up mobile home or trailer from any television show or movie, this was Ellen's. It was really worn down. I vividly remember it had rained a little bit that July afternoon. It was hot, but it was also muggy and really humid because of that rain. And I drove out to Ellen's house with the box of the food box and knocked on Ellen's door. And there were some animals scampering about outside. And it took Ellen a while to get to the door. And I'll never forget, as soon as Ellen opened the door, there was this blast of hot air that just smelled of animals and urine that just kind of hit me in the face. And there was Ellen. And I said, hi, Ellen, I'm here with your food box. She said, oh, thank you so much. Please come in. And I followed Ellen back into her home. And again, there were some animals scampering about. And as Ellen walked, she held on to the credenza and walked alongside. And I followed behind her, and she used it kind of as her assistive device. And it was so worn out, and it was so dirty, but that's how she got around her house. And I remember looking down at that and seeing how worn out it was. And I followed Ellen back into the kitchen, and Ellen sat down at her kitchen table, and I put the groceries on the table and offered to put some of them away. And it was like the nursery rhyme, Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard and her cupboards were bare. Sure enough, her cupboards were bare, but that's why we were there, right? To bring these canned goods and commodities. So I put the canned beans up in there's always donated canned beans at the food bank. So put the canned beans up in the cupboard and put a couple of those things away. But what wasn't like the nursery rhyme, what really surprised me was when I opened Ellen's refrigerator. It was also empty, except for a sack of potatoes. Now, I've seen an empty refrigerator before. We all have. We haven't gone to the grocery store. There's no leftovers. But in the door of our refrigerator, there's always the condiments, right? There's the ketchup, the mustard, the mayonnaise, the salad dressing. It's been there for months. That's probably expired. But her refrigerator was completely empty except for a sack of potatoes. And all I had was a donated 1 lone gallon of milk, and I put that 1 lone gallon of milk in her refrigerator and closed the door. And I went back to the kitchen table, and Ellen had been pulling things out of the box, and she lifted up the day-old loaf of bread that I brought and a jar of peanut butter. And she says, thank you so much for bringing peanut butter and a loaf of bread. I just love peanut butter sandwiches. And then she repeated it. I just love peanut butter sandwiches. Thank you so much for bringing peanut butter and a loaf of bread. Thank you so much for bringing this peanut butter and this loaf of bread. I just love peanut butter sandwiches. And then she paused and she said, this is like Thanksgiving. I will never forget that. I'll never forget the smell, the sights of that little home. And I'll never forget what she said, that jar of peanut butter and that day-old loaf of bread for her was like Thanksgiving. And I learned from Ellen this incredible power of giving doesn't have to be grand or spectacular, but it's simple. And it's those simple acts of service that make an impactful or big difference. That simple jar of peanut butter and loaf of bread for her was like an abundant Thanksgiving. It reminds me of a story, or it really validates the story in 2 Kings, where a Syrian comes to the prophet Elisha, and the Syrian says, hey, I've got leprosy. I need you to cure me. I need you to heal me. And Elisha's like, the prophet's like, well, just go bathe yourself in the river Jordan 7 times and you'll be fine. And the guy's like, no, I want something big. Please, God, I need God to come down and just like take this leprosy right out of me, and I want something grand and spectacular. And Elisha says, no, all you do is have to go and just simple. Just follow what I'm saying and go bathe yourself in the River Jordan and you'll be healed. And this is what it says in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 13. And his servants came near me and spake unto me and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? If God wants us to do these spectacular things, yes, absolutely. But he's also asking us to do the really small and simple things. I work for a nonprofit as Pastor Hamberry shared as I was in his introduction, and I've worked for nonprofits for a number of years. I see giving across the United States. I did it here in Frederick. I've done it in other communities, and I love to look and explore how giving is making a powerful difference. Giving and that simplicity or that small act is critical for nonprofits, and there's about 1.5 million nonprofits in the entire country, and they employ about 12 million individuals. But guess how many volunteers they have? 64 million people are volunteering for those nonprofits, and they have over 10 million donors. Those nonprofits exist and make a positive impact across America because of those individual donors and those individual volunteers. The employees don't do it alone. Those small and simple gifts come together. And I look at giving across America, and giving numbers have dropped and been on the decline since COVID. We've had a couple disruptions in how people give. But the largest percentage of philanthropic donors are still, you think, oh, well, corporations are giving a lot of money, right? Well, corporations give about 1% of that philanthropic donation that nonprofits receive. And you're like, well, it must be the foundations. There's so many really large foundations. I volunteer with the foundation. It must be the foundation giving. Yeah, absolutely. Foundations give about 3% of that philanthropic giving. But volunteers, those individuals, are giving 10% of that individual giving that shows up. The rest of the dollars come in usually through grants and contracts, but of those philanthropic dollars coming in, the highest percentage comes from individual donors. It's those small and simple things that make the biggest difference. So that's one of the most powerful things to me, is remembering Ellen and that small and simple gift and how powerful it can be. I love going to the movies. I love a good rescue story, whether it be in a book, but I really like how Hollywood portrays a good rescue story. It often plays out in a war movie, Dunkirk, some of the classic movies, or about Midway and World War II, where there's somebody stranded or a team that needs some extra help, and so the rescuers come in, the cavalry comes in, and they all rally together and race together to go rescue and save a team or an individual. We also love it in the science fiction movies, all the Jedi, like, hey, let's rally the Jedi together to go save somebody in Star Wars, or the Avengers, all the superheroes come together and support each other to go and rescue something or to save something. I love those stories. But sometimes what Hollywood misses is the capability of the person being rescued. And it doesn't make for as an exciting story to talk about their capabilities of the person being rescued. It is more entertaining to watch people rescue somebody else. But I sometimes need to pause my eagerness to be in that rescue mentality and look at the capability of those that might be in the situation of needing a rescue at the time. And it reminds me of a passage from, it's a Hebrew philosophy from Maimonides. In this Hebrew philosophy, it talks about why people give and why people go out. And sometimes they like to rescue. That's one reason why we like to volunteer. That's one reason why we like to give, is like, I fixed that. I feel really good about myself because I went in and I rescued her. I saved that situation. I made that situation better. And I like that feeling sometimes. It really looks good in movies and in Hollywood, but I also like that feeling sometimes. And in this Hebrew philosophy, Maimonides also talks about why some people volunteer or donate it's because they are given praise for it afterwards. That's good. That's all right. We all give for different reasons, and sometimes we like and appreciate that recognition. Sometimes we give and volunteer and we donate back because we are begrudgingly doing so because we've been asked by somebody else. Like, yeah, of course, Mom and Dad, I will go and volunteer this weekend. Or, yeah, of course I will sign up for that thing because they all kind of pressured me into doing that project or something like that. And we feel that pressure. That's okay, and that's good. All giving is good, and we welcome that and embrace that, and that can be very powerful. But as this Hebrew philosophy goes on, the highest or the most, I guess one of the most beautiful forms of giving comes when the giver and the receiver join hands in an equal partnership to make the situation better. That's the untold story in that rescue, where the capability of the receiver and the capability of the giver come together in this equal partnership to make a situation beautiful. I love that message. A couple years ago, I was, again, back at a food bank, and at this time I was employed at a food bank and working there, and I worked in administrative functions, and I was in the front of the office doing mostly the work at the food bank at the time. And it was the holiday season, and so during the holiday season, they ask all the employees to spend some time working extra hours. If you need to come in late, you can work extra hours, but we need you to work late night at the docks of the food bank. And I'm like, fine. And it was my turn. It was a Monday night before Thanksgiving, and I was assigned to work the docks at the food bank. So I didn't remember until that day, so I spent the whole day in the office, and then I was assigned to also spend most of my evening volunteering or working the docks in the food bank. And what a sight. How much generosity there was in a community for people showing up on the Monday before Thanksgiving to donate food to the food bank. They all wanted to make sure people had food, and it was a beautiful sight. And I remember going back to the docks, and I was tired and a little frustrated, but I did it anyway, and seeing a line of cars. And it was darker, of course, because it was the evening and daylight savings and all that. And but there was a line of cars, and I could see the line of lights of people just waiting to drive up to donate turkeys, frozen turkeys for Thanksgiving, and all the other fixings that come with it. And I will never forget one family that came up, and they were so proud. And I think there was mom and dad and grandma, as well as a couple younger kids. And they're like, we all just went to the grocery store and bought all these turkeys. We each bought a turkey, the one that we could carry and bring it in. And they were all excited and having a great time. And they were carrying those big frozen birds. And I don't know, the last time, if you can remember, carrying those big frozen birds is kind of awkward. It's that funny yellow or red netting around there, and it stretches, and you're like, how do I hold this? And it sometimes hurts, and you're not sure if it's going to hold or not in that netting. And then the ones that don't have any netting, you're just like this ice ball that you're trying to juggle and hold stable, and it starts to defrost a little bit, so it's really cold and starts to get frosty on your hands, and particularly slippery as you're trying to carry it. And that's that awkwardness that occurred that night as everybody was showing up to donate turkeys. And this family that was so willing to give had that struggle of, how to load the turkeys up, and we received it and thanked them, and they went on their way. About a month or so after that, I was assigned to go work at another food bank, and this time I was giving out turkeys to people and families that needed them for Christmas. And I noticed something really similar that occurred. The families that showed up to receive the turkeys had a similar joy and happiness as the families of those giving. And the families that received those turkeys also struggled to hold that stupid red netting as well, and that turkey and that frozen bird. And we'd hand them the frozen bird, and they were so happy, and they would juggle it as well. And oh my gosh, this is slippery, and it's starting to defrost a little bit. And it was awkward for them to hold as well. And there was this commonality between the givers and the receivers. And there was a common joy and a common struggle that they all shared. And in Proverbs, we read, the rich and poor meet together. And God is the maker of all of them. God is the creator of all of them. It doesn't say rich or poor. And there's a big distinction there between rich or poor, because that is two very distinguishable entities or people. But the rich and the poor. And to me, that shows that maybe we all have a little bit of rich and a little bit of poor in us. Maybe we all have a little bit of struggle and we all have a little bit of joy within us, that there's a commonality there. And I love to reflect on that and think of how many times where it's really easy to say, well, I'm a giver, I'm here to fix the situation, and you are a receiver. But no, we are rich and poor. And I love how it distinguishes and allows us space to be who we are in our individual identities and identify with our strengths and our weaknesses and own that personal identity that is very individual, and also recognize that we have some commonalities in our humanity. And it's that coming together under our Creator that makes a beautiful situation. It's that giving and that receiving in that equal partnership, making a situation better or improving on a situation. When I think of empowering others and trying to recognize the capabilities of receivers, there's a couple things. That first is the rich and the poor. It's recognizing the richness of those around me. And when I seek to give and to provide or to go out and volunteer, I have to remember to recognize the richness of those that are also receiving. And that's one of the first things that I do when I work on empowering others in that giving. The second thing that I do when I work on empowering others when giving happened or something I learned when I was a receiver on the end of getting help or receiving help at one time. And when you receive help, sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, this is so generous of you. Thank you so much. I can't do that. I can't take this. This is too much. I can't take this. And I've caught myself saying that many times where I'm like, I can't. I don't deserve this. I don't need this. No, you do that. I'm going to do this myself. We have a little bit of pride and independence where we don't always want to receive. But then somebody said to me, Josh, you do the same for me. And I recognize that all of the receivers also have this capability to do the good. And that's something that I always try to remember, is recognize the richness or recognize the capability or recognize the willingness to give back of those that are also receiving, and empower them to do that. As you give, say, I know you do the same for me. That's why we're doing this. We're all in this journey together. We're all joining hands together on this walkway home, and we're in this as an equal partnership to make our situation better. But recognizing their willingness is also very empowering to them, to remind them that, yeah, you have the same power within you. We're just on this journey together. That's why we're equally sharing hands and holding hands and walking together. Sometimes we get caught up in this, well, I don't give a hand out, I give a hand up. Wonderful. That's a beautiful way of looking at how we give. But that hand up still implies that someone's up here and someone else is down here. How about we just hold hands and join together in this situation? Instead of it being a hand out or a hand up because I'm up here and you're down here, let's just join together in an equal partnership to make a situation better. The last story I want to tell is about a service project I was on a number of years ago, where I brought a youth group down for a service project to a homeless youth center. And homeless youth are in a really weird situation in America, because if you're under the age of 18, you have to go into the foster care system. If you're not emancipated, you have to go and get in some sort of guardianship or something like that. And you can't just go to the homeless shelter like anybody over the age of 18 where you are independent. So if there's a homeless youth, oftentimes they find themselves running away from the foster situations, where they've been kicked out of their homes, and they're kind of in this lost space where you can't really go to a shelter because they got to call somebody to put you in custody, and you may not want to be in an unsafe circumstance. So they tend to float around a lot. They call it couch surfing or couching around. And we went down and volunteered at this homeless youth center. They closed every night because they couldn't shelter them, but we served dinner. So I brought a youth group down from my church, and we were like, hey, we're going to volunteer today at the homeless youth center. And we're from the suburbs, and you're in the inner city, and here we are, and we come down. And we made lasagna, and we made salad and garlic bread and served milk. And we all got behind the counter at the little kitchen there, and we prepared the lasagna and the salad and the garlic bread. And then the homeless youth came in, and there were only about a dozen or so of them, and they came in on the other side of the counter, and pretty rough-looking bunch of guys and kids. And they came in, and they were on one side of the counter, and we were doing our volunteer project and handed out lasagna and garlic bread and salad. And Peter, one of the youth that was in our group, our church group, walked to the other side of the counter. I'm like, oh, where are you going, Peter? And he walked around to the other side of the counter, and he sat down at the table where the homeless youth were eating. And he noticed one of the young men at the table was drawing and had some artwork. He's like, hey, I'm Peter. What's your name? And the guy looks up. I'm Moonstar. Hey, Moonstar, it's nice to meet you. What you drawing? Well, tell me about your painting here. And Peter engaged in this conversation with Moonstar, and they talked back and forth for the entire meal. They made this connection. And I finished the service project, and we all went back to our suburbs, and the project was over. But I learned a lot from Peter. But then Peter told me something else that happened a couple months later. He had gone into the city with a kind of a group date, a bunch of friends. They were downtown in the city. It was winter time. It was cold. It was dark. And Peter got off the public transit with his friends, and they were walking around, in the downtown area, and he recognizes somebody in army fatigues and a dark coat. And he recognized him as Moonstar, and he goes up, he says, hey, Moonstar, how's it going? And Moonstar says, hey, Peter. And they gave each other a hug, and Peter introduced him to all of his friends, and that was it. No other long dramatic story, but it was just a simple interaction where they recognized each other's names, they hugged each other, and all of a sudden they were these equal partners in this journey together in life to spread warmth, to be together, and to recognize the humanity that exists in all of us. I love that story. I want to always do the big things like Elisha, or the Syrian who comes to Elisha. I want to be the one who's like, you know what, we've got to solve hunger in America. I see this issue across America every single day, and I want to fix hunger issues in America. We need to make sure SNAP is more accessible, and we need to make sure the WIC program continues and does a better job, or I want to address issues with the HUD secretary. We've got a housing crisis, and I see it across America. And I'm like, we're gonna talk to HUD right away, and we've got to fix this problem with housing in America because we've got a housing crisis. I look at accessible to health, or access to health care, and how unaffordable health care is in our country, and how many people are going without good health care, and how complicated it is to fix some of these service delivery systems, that even us nonprofits perpetuate the complexity of accessing food or health care or housing. I want to fix them all. And like the Syrian going to Elisha's like, no, there's some simple things you got to do first. Make sure you're taking care of the people around you. I know that minimum wage laws are not where they should be, but you can still tip pretty good and make sure you treat your waiter and your waitresses with respect. I know that there's some issues with housing in America, and not everybody has access to affordable or safe housing, but make sure the people that you live with or come into your home feel safe and welcome, and that you have a welcoming space for them. I know that there's issues with health care, but maybe you can just look after those that aren't as well around you, and do your best to lighten their lives mentally, because maybe that's something that you can provide when it comes to access to mental health or wellness. All of these things come to play when I think of doing the big, grand things. I have to remember those small and simple things like the loaf of bread and the jar of peanut butter that can make a big difference. I think of that equitable partnership or recognizing the capability and like, you know what, they would do the same for me. I need to make sure I'm always stepping up and recognizing the richness and the value of those around us. The last scripture I want to share is from James, which we talked about, and this pure religion, and how this pure religion or this religion undefiled is going out and taking care of people around us. When I was about 16 years old, and I grew up in a different faith, and I remember getting a blessing from a patriarch in our church, and they wrote it down so it was something I could reference, but I memorized a portion of that blessing that I received. It says, Josh, get yourself situated in your chosen profession, all the while remembering who you are and who you represent, and then you will discover that your work and the Lord's work will coincide, that of the saving of souls of men. I'm like, okay, I want to be an architect. How does that fit in? I know, I will be an architect and design church buildings. I'm going to be an architect and design church buildings so it coincides with the Lord's work. And then I'm like, well, I really like teaching. Maybe I will be a teacher. And in our faith, there was very few paid ministries or paid teaching positions in my faith. And I'm like, well, I got to make a living. It says choose a profession, and maybe I will be one of the paid teachers in my faith, and I can get paid for it. And then I got wrapped up in volunteering at the food bank and delivering food boxes to Ellen and a bunch of other things, and started working for a nonprofit. And I found myself at a prison and talking on a Saturday afternoon in Baltimore to females in an institution that had been incarcerated, and talking to them about community programs when they left. And I remembered the times when I visited Ellen, who was hungry. I remember setting up programs for orphans, but not really orphans, but young people who didn't really have a place, like that Homeless Youth Resource Center. And recognizing that my work and the Lord's work does coincide. That we are here in pure religion. It's really cool to build buildings. It's really cool to teach, but coming together is really what religion is about, and recognize the commonality of our humanity. I will always fight for the big picture, but I will always remember to do the little things, because those are the things that make the biggest difference in that pure religion. Thank you so much for letting me join you today, and I appreciate the time, and I share these things with you in the name of Jesus Christ.